What's going on? This is another episode of the Snodgrass podcast. Thank you guys for joining me today. I got an amazing guest, Mr. Eric Brewer, on the podcast with me. Number one, Eric is an amazing leader. He's been a real estate investor for the last 16, 17 years. He's just an amazing man. He's a leader. He's part of the leadership team at Collective Genius. He's a coach. He's a family man. And he just thinks outside the box and thinks creatively. If you feel like you're stuck right now in the real estate world, then you're not alone, number one. But he helps you think outside of the box, think creatively, think of strategies, and he gives some amazing pieces of advice today on what to do if you're feeling stuck and to think creatively and strategies in the real estate world. So before I introduce you to Eric Brewer, though, I want you guys to go over to our website at irondeep.com. We got a brand new Men's Awakening adventure coming up. It's in Helen, Georgia. We rent out this amazing log cabin, and we're going to have about 25 to 30 real estate entrepreneurs, mostly real estate guys and other business owners there. We're going to be there for a singular purpose. Number one, in our faith. But number two, we're going to be building deeper relationships with God and each other. And it's just going to be an amazing Men's Awakening experience. This is an introduction to our community at Iron Deep. We'd love for you guys to be there and check that out. What's going on, Eric?
What's up, Brett? How are you, my man?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Super excited. I've known you for quite several years. We're part of the Collective Genius Mastermind group, and I know you're part of the leadership team in that mastermind organization with Jason Medley. That's how we know each other. But honestly, I just, getting to know you, watching some of your presentations, you're a family man, you are a community man, but also you're just an amazing real estate investor. You're very creative and just grounded down to earth. We're going to talk about that a little bit today, but let's just ask this question, like, who is Eric Brewer, man?
I guess first and foremost, I've been a father for about 19 years, but I have 4 children between the age of 8 and 2 right now. So father used to be kind of part of my resume. Now it's at the very top. It's the thing that I seem to really enjoy the most and allocate the majority of my time. Just trying to, I got 4 daughters, so just trying to be a good father to, my kids and be present as much as possible for my wife, and then balancing, work in there somewhere in between is, I would say, a 30,000 foot view of who I am.
Yeah. That's quite the age range. I mean, 19 to 2, right? Is this?
Yeah, it took a little hiatus there.
There you
go. So as I had my son, Camden, who's my oldest, he's graduating high school this year, and met my wife when he was 4, had him before I married my wife, Sonia, now, and then we were together a couple years before we had our first, and so Camden was 11 when I had my second. So Maya, who's my oldest daughter, is 8. And then about every 2 years, almost like clockwork, we kind of accidentally decided to have another baby, and I just kept having all these daughters. My wife's actually pregnant now.
Wow.
She's due in May, so we have a little boy coming.
Wow.
Eric Jr. is scheduled to arrive in May.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's awesome, man. We'll start over again, hit repeat, rinse and repeat. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just like the housing industry, which you are also just a master at it. I mean, you've been in real estate for 16, 17, 18 years now. Done a few thousand deals, and we don't say that lightly. Fix and flip out of Pennsylvania. You do about 350 deals a year. Have built this amazing business. So kind of take us in. I don't want to maybe start out back at the beginning. A lot of people say, tell us your origin story, but take us into maybe today, like right now, because we're entering just kind of a season that a lot of us haven't quite known or maybe experienced. You maybe experienced it more than other investors that I've had on the podcast, but take us into like what's your mindset like today coming into 2023 with real estate?
It's a good question. I was around in 2008, and obviously there was a set of circumstances that created opportunity for some and created a lot of frustration and anxiety for others, and I was one of the fortunate ones that was able to persevere through 2008. So in 2023, I think we saw, or even probably around the middle of last year, when interest rates started to really change what we saw from buyer activity. And there was all this sort of tension and worry, I think specifically in our niche of business, and rightfully so, right? Like there was definitely change that was happening. And I think what a lot of people saw was a potential crash or a correction. For me, I just see it as just what it is change. It's not better or worse than what I was experiencing in 2019 and 2020. Frankly, I kind of prefer this sort of calmer atmosphere that we're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like COVID was frantic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Post-COVID was bananas. And while from the outside looking in, everybody would say, you're in real estate, prices are through the roof, you must be doing great. It was really, really easy to sell a house the last 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It got really hard to buy because
Mm.
there was a lot of hyper competition around discounted properties. And then it expanded to where you didn't even need a discounted property. You just needed a property.
Mm.
You could become a wholesaler or an investor because of the way interest rates were and make profit and make hay just by getting an asset. You didn't even need to, for the first time ever that I can remember, you didn't even have to buy it at a discount.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's just, I think in 2023 is just having an awareness of the change that's happening, not being paralyzed by it. And then finding what I believe will be some significant opportunity that's created by other people not responding to the change.
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
So when everything's very predictable, the way it was, say from like 2019 is where I felt like the market was as good as I could ever imagine it. Right. And then post COVID, it was twice as good, depending on what you consider good. It was, really good to be a seller. It was tough to be a buyer. Now that we've seen this sort of cooling off, I believe that somewhere between 30 and 50% of wholesalers or fix and flippers may be out of business, maybe took a hiatus and were uneasy about, the volatility of the market or the perceived volatility and just won't ever go back into the business. I know a lot of people that in certain markets saw, a 25% decline in values in a short window and sold some flips and lost hundreds of thousands of dollars and did it 5 different times, which I'm no math genius, but I think that's $1 million.
Yeah.
So even if they stay in business, right, that person then really modifies their behavior and becomes super conservative, understandably, but they're probably not as aggressively looking for opportunities because of their experience at the end of last year. So for me, I was impacted like everybody else. There was some anxiety, some worry, some uncertainty that settled in as the market started to unfold. But I just tried to stay consistently aware of all I was dealing with is change. It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of real estate. It's not the end of me. It's just change. And I just wanted to be aware of how opportunities were being created in that change and be someone that benefited from it, not saw it as, a negative.
Yeah.
So I've tried to just kind of reprogram my brain that what we're going through right now in this correction is a positive set of circumstances that if leveraged correctly, I would hope that I could look back on 10 years from now and say, man, what really pole vaulted my business or pole vaulted my portfolio? I did really well in 2023 because as the market cooled down and everybody was sort of stepping away, I doubled down and I picked up some assets or I made some decisions or, one thing that we've been able to acquire during this sort of cooling off period has been talent. We've hired 2 business owners that the pending sort of anxiety that the market correction was creating made them sort of tap out and go, I don't want to be an entrepreneur anymore. I want to go work for someone in an entrepreneurial atmosphere, but I want someone else to worry about keeping the lights on. I want to work for someone else that'll think 5 years down the road. I just want to show up, do my job, and go home. And, so we've been able to acquire some significant talent in addition to a few assets we've bought recently that I don't, believe were available a year ago, not at the prices and the terms we were able to get. So I'm excited for 2023.
Yeah.
Cautiously optimistic, I would say.
Yeah. No, that's good. I love how you just talked about it's nothing, just change, and just kind of being aware of the change, and how are you going to respond to the change.
Yeah.
I know, like, even me included, and a lot of the guys that I'm around, and just having these conversations about some of the anxiety and stress, and sometimes that paralyzation
Yeah.
that we're dealing with. So one of the things that I just keep coming back with is, how can we be more creative? I mean, I think, like, one of the things that the last few years, I think it's just made a lot of us lazy. It's made some of our sales guys really, really lazy. It's made business owners really, really lazy. We think it's really, really easy, and we've forgotten that sometimes, running a business can be challenging, and just got us soft, I believe. And now we have to put our big boy pants on and try to think about creatively. And I think that, when I think about people thinking creatively, I think of you. I mean, you're doing a lot of different creative strategies. You have the Brewer method that I want to dive into with
Yeah.
novations. So what are some of the other ways? I mean, one of the things you talked about is doubling down, finding talent, but what are some of the other ways that you're having to think more creatively during this time?
Yeah. So I bought my first office building this year. When we look at opportunities in single family residential, that's where I've been for 15 years, right? I'm buying and selling 3 bedroom, 1.5 bath ranchers on a quarter acre. And what I've started to imagine, and this really started with CG probably about a year ago. And Phil Green and Eric Guideson were on stage. Those guys are from San Diego, California. And trends really probably start 6 months to a year on the West Coast, and then specifically California, before they make their way to the Midwest and eventually the Northeast, where I am. And those guys were going through it, right? They were seeing values plummeting. Plummeting's probably strong. They were seeing a correction of values, rising inventory, and they were making adjustments. And there was a financial analyst that spoke at that meeting. I can't think of the guy's name, but all he does is study. He's the type of guy where you go, "Hey, what's your opinion on this?" He doesn't have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
He'll simply recite what the data would indicate, right? And he said, "We're at an affordability index of X percent. The next time interest rates go up, the affordability goes below the historic, right, mark. Like, for the last 100 years, every time affordability got below this amount, there had to be pricing correction," or he used the word pricing damage. And he said, "So my opinion is that things will probably continue the way they have the last 200 years. Next time interest rates go up a quarter of a point, there has to be pricing damage." And then he talked about stacking cash, and how when there's pricing damage, people that have large institutional style money swoop in, they buy a bunch of assets, and then they never sell them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's his pitch on how the wealthy become wealthier, and how wealth is created is in times of uncertainty. Prices come down, they buy them at historical discounts, and then over the course of 40 years, they 1,000x their money,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm sitting there going, well, I don't have institutional style money or
Mm-hmm.
cash, right? Like, I do pretty good. We manage our finances well, but I don't have reserves that I can go buy $100 million worth of real estate and
Mm-hmm.
say, "That's it. I'm done for
Yeah.
the next 15 years. I'll see you the next recession."
Right.
But I started to imagine, so who are the people that do? And I think now, more so than 5 years ago, hedge funds are more visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what do hedge funds struggle with? Deal flow.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been able to figure out that customer interface where they can go out and run marketing the way that companies like ours do, and figure out that emotional aspect of selling a property to discount and solving some of these sort of unique problems our customers deal with. And I said, well, if those people want to buy large volume of assets and they have the money, but they don't have deal flow, and I have deal flow, but I don't have institutional money, why the heck wouldn't the two of us work together?
Mm.
So from that meeting until where I sit today, I've allocated a specific amount of my time every day, every week, and every month to try and find alignments with people at a local level that have either access to or manage institutional volumes of money, that want to acquire single family or multifamily assets, but lack the direct access to those assets, and would benefit from a relationship with me where I could bring deal flow, they bring capital, and there's this marriage that makes a lot of sense. And I now have two of those that within a short period of time will be legally binding, consummated relationships where it wouldn't just be a transactional exchange where I'm either selling or wholesaling the house or renovating and selling to them. I would have the opportunity to retain equity in these transactions and acquire these at what I would call an institutional level, like hundreds of millions of dollars of acquisitions over the next several years. And when I talk about change, as the depression was setting in, that I didn't have institutional style money to capitalize on the recession, because I had this sort of modified mindset of it's just change, figure it out, be part of the change, don't be an observer. Mm-hmm. I imagined, right? Because it's kind of crazy to think about me. I barely graduated high school. I'm just a good old boy from Pennsylvania that stumbled into sales when I was a 22-year-old kid and got good at it, and luckily made a pivot to real estate 15 years ago. For me to sit in front of someone that controls $250 million is extremely intimidating.
Yeah, for sure.
And what I found was, when I sit across from that person and I'm like, these guys graduated Ivy League schools, they're worked on Wall Street, they're brilliant, but they have an admiration for an entrepreneur and a salesperson that's able to sort of grind and put deals together and sell, because the skill set that's created the opportunity for them to manage institutional style amounts of money is almost opposite of the skill set it takes to be an entrepreneurial, sales driven, assertive, socially active person, right? Like they never operate in these sort of dark offices stuck in analysis, and they're looking at trends and data 15 years down the road. I can't spend 30 seconds looking at data, or I get frantically anxious.
Exactly.
So that's an example of, like, for me, how just changing my mindset, which was tough. Like I was paralyzed for 90 days. Why is this happening to me? I can't believe it. I've worked too hard. Woe is me. Like, dude, like I almost, like, if I could have smacked myself, I would have. And it was like, hey, you can either watch this happen to you, or you can be part of the change and be the guy that's out in front carrying the flag saying, follow me. I'm gonna charge into battle and come out the other side a warrior. And that's for me, is it gives me goosebumps to talk about that, because I'm hoping that these relationships, decisions, and sort of audacity I had to think bigger than I have before, it's either going to cause me to crash and burn miserably and I'll start all over, or I think it'd be something that when I look back, 20 years from now, or I imagine what, decisions I make today could impact the people I care about. I'm of the belief that what I do these next 12 to 24 months will result in a legacy that I'm proud of.
No, that's awesome. Again, we just kind of go back to just thinking creatively and searching for that opportunity. So it sounds like you went through this period of time of kind of paralyzation, and then you just kind of came out and started thinking about these hedge funds, these relationships. It always takes me back to kind of when you first got started. I mean, you were kind of thinking about real estate, but you didn't really know how to do it, and then you finally got in, you started doing it, and now we need to go back to those ideas and how do we level up just during this season. One of the ways that you've been able to level up, you gave a presentation at Collective Genius about 5 years ago about novations, and I know a lot of people, I think you've been doing this strategy for a while. You didn't think that much about it, but this has became a big thing, and a lot now. Like, I think some of the big players in every market are talking about novations. So can you just kind of dive into that a little bit? I know you have a system called the Brewer method about novations. I think this is a great method for wholesalers that, right, they don't have maybe the cash to take things down, and they can be able to list things on the MLS. Yeah. So talk to us about the Brewer method real quick, about novations, because that's another very, very creative strategy. Yeah,
I'll give you just a little bit of context to help anybody that's listening to this have the right idea. So one, novations have been around for 200 years, right? It's a long-standing general business practice that at its core, the definition just means the replacement of an agreement or a term inside of an agreement, That's it, right? So it just means replacement. So what does that definition start to mean when you look at the application of wholesale style real estate? If you think about the normal wholesale deal, it's an assignment. It means I have a contract with the seller. I'm going to assign my interest in the property to a cash buyer that's going to fix it up and sell it. Mm-hmm. So fundamentally, that's the mechanics. When you replace your agreement, right? It's like, Eric, why would I replace my agreement rather than assign it? The challenge with an assignment is it's not a lendable transaction. So a retail borrower cannot buy an assignment. FHA, VA, USDA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they cannot lend on an assignment. It's not an arm's length transaction. It's not able to be insured because the wholesaler is party to the transaction, but they can't insure the wholesaler. Novation, which is replacement, becomes a financeable transaction. So now if you start to go, all right, well, what does that mean for me? Imagine if every wholesale deal you got, you weren't forced to sell to a cash buyer at a discount, and you could sell the property that you bought at a discount for retail value without closing on it, without funding it, without renovating it. Mm-hmm. So what I want you to, if you checked out at this point in the podcast, you had to get out of your car, you had to get off your headphones, and you had to leave. It's not a fix and flip strategy. For a long time, there were some people that used novation as a fix and flip strategy. They would partner with the seller, which sounds horrible to me. And they would do renovations, which is my second least favorite thing to do, is rehab homes. It's tough. It's challenging. It takes a ton of cash. And it's the reason why I don't have hair like Brett right now, dealing with contractors. It's a beautiful process to watch a house go from beat up to fully renovated. But the in-between part is excruciating. So the way I would describe novations is a wholesale style transaction on a property that's in wholesale condition being sold on the open market to a retail buyer. So now when you understand that, right, like the wholesale condition that I said, Brett, when people look about generating leads generally in a wholesale business, they look for fixer-uppers, right?
For sure.
Driving for dollars, you look for the worst house in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. If you get a list, you look for code violations, evictions, pre-foreclosure. So the whole way we've been taught to do wholesale real estate is to go find a distressed seller who has a property that needs a ton of work and will sell it to you at 50 cents on the dollar. Good model, works. People have made a gazillion dollars doing it. Couple challenges. One, there's less sellers today than there were 3 years ago. Just the inventory's down, whether it's distressed or whatever, less people are selling their homes. Number two, hyper competitive. Every person that gets into wholesale real estate is buying the same list, cold calling the same list, mailing the same list, competing for the same Google ad. I actually use this analogy of the business of wholesale is finding a needle in a haystack. It's a fixer-upper owned by a distressed seller that'll sell it for 50 cents on the dollar. And then once we buy that needle in the haystack or get it under contract, we got to go sell it to another needle in a different haystack, a cash buyer that's crazy enough to fix up a house and sell it and rent it and hope that they can make money. When you start to do novations, which are properties that's not necessarily owned by a distressed seller, the house doesn't necessarily need a bunch of work. My best novations are straight up turnkey. Houses are perfect or at or around average condition. So now when you start to imagine, what if I could novate or do wholesale style transactions on every property? Any seller that wants to sell becomes a novation opportunity. And I'll give you quick math, right? Like the normal math on a wholesale deal is like ARV, 75% minus reno is MAO, right? It's ABC, MAO, ARV, all this stuff. When you look at a wholesale novation style property, you literally can pay 85%. And the only number you really want to focus on when you do novations is current condition retail value. If I took this property in its current condition, listed on the MLS, and said, hey, FHA, VA, buyers, come buy my property. Go ahead and do your home inspection, get a full-blown appraisal. What would that person pay for it? It is tens of thousands of dollars higher than what an investor would pay for it. So now when you have this tool in your tool belt, how many times do you have a seller that says, Brett, this sounds good, but I'm not going to give it away? Brett, what you guys say sounds pretty attractive. I know that you can close quickly and I'm not in any hurry though.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to hold on to it. Literally, there should be an alarm that goes off in your head when someone says, I'm not going to give it away, or I'm not in any hurry. You should be having a novation conversation with this person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I actually stumbled on it back in 2008 because prior to 2008, every flip that I sold, no one ever used FHA financing. Prior to the financial crisis, like you could get 80-20 loans, you could get 100% financing with bad credit. There was a surplus of loan products. No one ever used FHA. Immediately after 2008, every single buyer that had an offer on my property was using FHA, and there's this thing called seasoning requirements for FHA that as a flipper is a bad word. It means, Brett, you got to hold the property for 91 days before you can even write a contract to sell it to an FHA buyer.
Right.
And then they won't close for 60 days after that. So I went from holding properties for 60 days to having to hold them for 6 months because of FHA seasoning requirements. And that's when I started looking for a solution. I discovered novations, and slowly I started to incorporate it into my direct to seller business. And I did about 2 or 3 of these and made like 25 grand on deals that everybody else passed on. And I was off and running. Now it's 50% of our business.
Wow.
And accounts for about 75% of my profit. I make more money on novation deals than I do fix and flips, wholesale deals, deals. It's the most profitable part of my business.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome, man. You've dug deep into that. And again, it's just that creativity. You're exactly right. I mean, the wholesale business in and of itself is completely different than it was 10 years ago. It's just so competitive, like a needle in a haystack. Like everyone's doing it. I get 10 texts a day and 50 emails a day from other wholesalers. So it is completely competitive. So I guess if you are a wholesaler and you're interested in that, just what other tools can you have in your tool belt to buy the properties that you can't buy or that you're not going to buy anyways using novations? So check out, where can you get that method at? Thebrewermethod.com?
Yeah, you go to brewermethod.com. We even have a few free tools on there that'll help you sort of wrap your head around how novations work. There's a bunch of testimonials on there, couple educational videos. It actually has a link to my social media. I talk about this stuff every day on Instagram and Facebook where I'm saying, hey, here's what a novation seller sounds like, and here's what you should say to them to get them to be receptive to this style deal. I do that stuff every day. I talk about it on my social media, and you can get the link there on brewermethod.com.
Awesome. Well, we definitely checked it out, guys, and we purchased that. So we're definitely looking to do novations here in Indianapolis. So thanks, Eric, for kind of putting that together. Eric, before we just wrap up this show, man, I want to just, again, coming into this season, you're thinking creatively, you're making these other relationships, doing novations. You're also coaching a lot of different individuals as well. I know that you're part of the Sharper team and the CG leadership team, and you see a lot of other businesses out there. So I know you're in the trenches of your own business, but what would you advise just other entrepreneurs and business owners, especially in the real estate right now? We've already talked about that a little bit, thinking creatively and looking for opportunities, but what would you say to them right now, especially, coming into this transitional year, 2023?
So 2 things. One would be keep going. Just literally don't quit. Right? There's going to be people that pivot. There's going to be people that are creative. There's going to be people that don't change a thing. I think the common thread for anybody that is able to navigate through this sort of tricky time period that we're in real estate is just the people that kept going. Right? You don't change a thing, but you just perseverance, I think, will be rewarded. Number 2 is double down on relationships. I've recently started doing it. Inspired by a guy that I coached. He put up this text or this Facebook post and he said, hey, any wholesaler in my market, I'll take you to lunch. Like every day, this dude's taking like selfies of like being out at these, restaurants with wholesalers. And I was like, dude, that seems like a pretty good idea. I talked to him. He's like, yeah, I'm getting like 1 or 2 referrals a month from it. And he's like, at the same time, I'm kind of creating some friendships and relationships with people that have been 15 minutes away from me for 15 years, and we both would just walk past each other all the time. And so now, literally twice a day, I have a breakfast meeting before I start my day at the office. I typically have a lunch meeting every day around afternoon. And those relationships are the things that when you say be creative, it's like, well, how do I be creative?
Mm.
How do I know the right thing to pivot to? Having one relationship with someone that's already doing something that may be creative to you, but has become ordinary to them,
Mm-hmm.
is the type of thing that could literally, get you out of a little bit of a slump, 10x the results that you've been seeing over the course of this, very stable, lucrative market. So I would double down on relationships, be intentional about it, like literally put it in your schedule to go out and either resurrect a relationship that's gotten stale, take somebody to lunch, take them to breakfast, grab coffee with them, invite them to your office, go visit them, and just keep going.
I love it. I love it. And I'm just going to take that wisdom myself, double down on relationships and keep going. So thank you so much, Eric Brewer, for being on the podcast today. Appreciate you, buddy. Guys, check out brewermethod.com, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks so much, Eric.
Thanks, Brett.